Jazz Kaleidoscope with my special guest Anna Brooks. Welcome to the studio.
Hello.
Welcome. Hello. Thanks for joining us. Take us right back to the beginning.
Music has always been around me from when I was very little. Some of my earliest memories involve listening to music. It was always around the house, but I'm not from one of these families who are, all singing, all dancing, performing people, but with a family with a very keen interest in music.
Yep. And you're not, although you're based in Birmingham, you're not from Birmingham originally.
No, I was born in Leicestershire, and I lived there until I was 8, and then moved to Bury St Edmunds and did a lot of music, was involved in a lot of music, because I played the violin and the piano as well. So I did orchestral music and school bands, the school big band, which was kind of what first opened my eyes to jazz. And then I came to Birmingham when I was 18 to study at the Birmingham Conservatoire, and I've been here ever since.
Goodness. And was it always jazz, or did you start with pop stuff and move in?
I actually only started listening to jazz and playing jazz when I was 21, so I was really relatively a late starter with jazz. But if I think back to the sort of music that I listened to in my childhood, we'd have the stereo and everyone would listen, the music would be around the house, and the sort of things that my parents would play was a really wide range of stuff. I remember dancing around to Flight of the Bumblebee when I was 2. I remember hearing Sgt. Pepper's, Frank Zappa, Frankie Valli, a really big mix of lots of different styles. Bonzo Dog Doodah Band, everything is in there. But actually, a lot of the things that I was listening to, although I'm not sure if I was kind of conscious of it, but at the time there's a lot of saxophone in the music that I was listening to, and I remember loving this sound but not necessarily knowing what it was. But I didn't actually take up the saxophone until I was 12.
And the rest is history. You've brought in some music.
I have.
So let's see how we go. The first one that you've got is John Mayer's Indo Jazz Fusion.
Yeah. In my third year of studying at the Birmingham Conservatoire, which was when I first started to play jazz and to improvise, I joined Indo Jazz Fusions, which was led by the late John Mayer, who was composer in residence at the time. And Indo Jazz Fusions was originally formed in the 1960s by John, who was a classical violinist, and he was a member of the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. And what he did was he took this band, which was often described as a double quintet. He was on violin and harpsichord, and then he had a flautist, sitar, tabla and tempora, and that was the sort of Indo part, the Indo kind of part of the quintet, as well as including some classical musicians. And he had with that this jazz lineup of alto sax and trumpet, piano, bass and drums. And at the time in the 60s, Joe Harriott was the alto player, and Kenny Wheeler was the trumpet player for a while as well. And the band ran until Joe Harriott died in 1973, at which point John decided he would shut down the band. But he reformed about 20 years later with members of the Birmingham Conservatoire. And I was one of those members. I hadn't really been playing jazz for very long at all. But the interesting thing about Indo Jazz Fusions was that it was one of the first ensembles to really use the term fusions and to blend jazz and classical and Indian music together in one ensemble. I think from our point of view when we reformed, sometimes I'm not sure how well that blend, sometimes it felt like we were kind of jostling a little against each other. But it's a really interesting concept, and I had some great opportunities with the band. We toured India and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka and UK festivals, which was fantastic. So the first track I have, and I hope I don't kind of scare people off with this, it sounds a little bit like it's been recorded in a church hall. It was way back in 1996, and it's a track called Mela from the album Asian Airs, and it features a great piano solo from Steve Tromans, who was a student at the Conservatoire. So yeah, I just thought it would give you some idea of this kind of interesting concept.
Yeah, let's have a listen to that. So, Anna, after John Mayer's Indo Jazz Fusions, what happened next?
Well, I was still studying at the Birmingham Conservatoire, and during that time, probably in my third year of study, I'd become interested in jazz. But I was studying on what was essentially a classical saxophone course. In fact, in the same year that I began playing jazz, I was also touring Paris with an orchestra playing the saxophone, the Glazunov saxophone concerto. So I was really kind of mixing the two things up. But when I became interested in jazz, one of the artists that I really became interested in, who was very kind of accessible to me, was Cannonball Adderley, and he was a huge inspiration to me at the time. What really grabbed me about him was his sound and this fantastic kind of blues inflection that he has, and particularly this wonderful kind of big fat vibrato sound. And on top of that, his ability to play bebop at lightning speed, with unbelievable clarity and direction, but everything sort of makes sense. There's no sort of nonsense in there. So the next track I've chosen is Work Song by Cannonball Adderley, and Work Song is one of the first songs that I learned to improvise on. It's just a basic minor blues, so it was fairly easy for me to kind of get to grips with. But I spent hours trying to reproduce Cannonball's tone and his vibrato. I was really fascinated by it, and I was really working on my sound at the time in both a classical and a jazz context. Although, to be honest, I've always been more towards a modern sound when I was studying just classical music. So I loved this track, and there's a great spot about 2 minutes into this track where Cannonball really gets the audience going, and they start to actually sing along with his solo, which you don't really hear in jazz, and then they sort of burst into applause, and there's just a really great atmosphere with this track, and it's one that I was listening to when I first started to listen to jazz.
Let's give that one a listen then. It's Work Song from Cannonball Adderley. Okay, Anna, what happened next?
Well, I started doing some jazz gigs, actually kind of threw myself in the deep end with, I think my first jazz gig was a duo gig in a restaurant, and I'd written out all of the scales for all of the chords that really, was kind of fumbling around, but really got a buzz out of it, and started studying while I was at the conservatoire, sort of in my own time, studying jazz stuff. There wasn't a jazz course at the Birmingham Conservatoire at the time, although there is now. And also on the classical course at the Birmingham Conservatoire now, there's a lot of provision for doing jazz. I'm actually a tutor at the Conservatoire on the so-called non-jazz course, who actually deals with all of the jazz elements. We make our students do a certain amount of jazz stuff because as a modern saxophonist, if you're going to be employable, you need to be able to stand up and do a solo, whether you're going to sort of carry that through to becoming a jazz artist or not. You still need the ability to be able to play an improvised solo if you're called upon. So I started transcribing Cannonball Adderley and transcribing Charlie Parker as well. I had a similar kind of love with Charlie Parker. I loved his sound. I guess it goes without saying that every jazz saxophonist must have been influenced by Charlie Parker. I'd be amazed to find someone who hadn't listened to him or found something appealing. So the next track that I've chosen is Lover Man by Charlie Parker. What I love the most about Lover Man, and also Parker's Mood, which is another great track, is that you don't often hear Charlie Parker playing a ballad. It's harder to find him playing a ballad than it is to find one of his, amazing 240 BPM bebop workouts, Yeah. And although he has a very direct sound and a very sort of non-sentimental way of playing ballads, how and what he plays still sort of really speaks to me. So some of my favourite features of this track are the way he growls some of the notes at the beginning. He almost sounds kind of slightly irritated, but it has this sort of contradiction. It's a ballad, but the way he plays it sort of really fascinates me. And it also has this really cheeky ending. It's a track with a lot of personality.
A tune always associated in my mind, of course, with Billie Holiday. After Lover Man and Charlie Parker, Warsaw Jazz Orchestra.
Yes, the next track that I'd like to play is a track called Orchid from a Warsaw Jazz Orchestra album entitled Watershed that was recorded in 1997. So it was about a year or so after I joined the Warsaw Jazz Orchestra. I was in the band for about 5 years. I thought it'd be nice to play something from a relatively local band who have and still have had some extremely talented members. We were just talking about Julian Arguelles had been through the band, Martin Shaw, some great players. And what I really love about the Warsaw Jazz Orchestra is that John Hughes, who led the band, is a really big believer in modern music, and during the time I was in the band, we played music written by band members and things composed especially for the band. So I guess this was the time at which I had left the conservatoire, I'd graduated, and some friends said, come along to this band, and I remember going totally the wrong way down the motorway and ending up in West Bromwich, I think, for my first rehearsal, ending up on the M5 instead of the M6, which was a nightmare, but eventually I found them and really, really loved the sound. I guess in the Warsaw Jazz Orchestra, I really kind of developed as a player. I developed my sound, particularly projection, because I had to play so loud as the lead alto player, particularly during the solos, because the band had this huge sound, and if you didn't manage to get over the top, then your solo would just be lost. So I think I really kind of pumped up the volume and also worked a lot on my sort of altissimo range, really screamy high notes, because again, if I didn't, and I was in the middle of a solo and the band was building up behind me, if I wasn't playing something high and loud, I would just kind of get lost. So this track, Orchid, is probably actually one of the more kind of middle of the road tracks that we played at the time, but I chose this one because it was an alto feature, so I'm sort of taking the lead on this one.
Quite right too. Orchid from the Warsaw Jazz Orchestra, featuring my guest this evening, Anna Brooks on alto saxophone. Continue your story.
When I joined the Warsaw Jazz Orchestra, I also started sort of hanging out with a group of musicians who were doing various other interesting things. So very soon afterwards, I joined Roy Wood's band. So I did the whole on the road, touring with a glam rocker sort of thing for a couple of years. Aside from that, I guess I was a bit further down the line with my jazz playing, and my next track, which is Hide and Seek by Joshua Redman, was a track that I was listening to at a time when I was doing gigs around the Birmingham jazz scene. At the time there was the Strathallan on a Sunday and commuter jazz sessions that are still going. And I was talking to Tony Dudley Evans from Birmingham Jazz after one of the gigs, and he was encouraging me to write music for my own quintet rather than just playing standards or, sort of covers. So I decided I was going to write some music, and Hide and Seek was compositionally a really big inspiration to me. This track has a sort of very composed middle ensemble section which really appealed to me, and also the way that the guitar and the sax play together is something that actually kind of features a lot in my own compositions that I wrote later on. Improvisationally, Joshua Redman is just spot on for me. I love his stuff. Nothing extra, nothing unnecessary, and a gorgeous sound. And I often quote him to my students by saying, listen to Joshua Redman, because he can play the most simple phrase but absolutely perfect, and it's often much, much harder to play one relatively simple phrase than it is to play 100 notes, because 100 notes you can hide behind the one that's not quite right, add a few more, but he can really nail a perfect phrase. And I actually met him because I play with the CBSO as well, the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, and they were doing a project with Joshua, and so I went along to the rehearsal. I said to some of the members, can I come along? And I took my CDs. I have this on a CD, and I've got it signed by Joshua, and it was the first and last time that I will ever attempt to tell someone I admire why I admire them, because I think really probably what I intended to say was, this is a huge inspiration, and I think I actually ended up just saying I love you, or whatever it was not what I had meant. But I love the groove on this track. It's very much my kind of thing.
Okay, let's give it a listen. That it's called Hide and Seek from Joshua Redman. What came next?
I think the next thing that happened really sort of significantly in jazz was being given the opportunity to be a rising star for the Jerwood Foundation. For the Cheltenham International Jazz Festival. I was commissioned to write some music for my jazz quintet. I had Alciona Mick on piano, who was studying at the Conservatoire. Great, really nice to have a female piano player as well, because always the only girl in the band, always. And I had Carl Hemmingsley on drums, who's a local musician, and Dave Foster on bass, and Tim Crampton on guitar, who are London-based players. Dave had been in the National Youth Jazz Orchestra, and Tim as well, I think. So I started writing some music, and I play you something next, maybe?
Yeah. Anna herself, again on alto saxophone, and a track from her quintet recording, and the track was called
Karmarama, the name of the track. Yeah, that was from an album that I recorded in 2003 called My Time, which featured all of the material that I'd written for the Cheltenham Jazz Festival. I was lucky because after the Jazz Festival I put together a Jazz Services tour, and while I was playing at the Brecker Jazz Festival, afterwards actually somebody came up to me and said, oh, there's a guy out there and he wants to give you this card, and he says he's starting a new record label and he has a new recording studio and he's looking for people to come and record an album. And I thought, yeah, because I never, I think it's probably a healthy thing, I never believe anything until it actually happens, so I kind of kept the card for a week or so, and then I thought, well, okay, I'll give the guy a call. And turns out this man, Martin Levan, had indeed got a fantastic studio in deepest Wales near Llandovery, and was looking for people to record, and really liked the band, and said, come down and record a demo, and we'll see how we get on, we'll see if we like how you sound. So the quintet and I all trekked down to Wales and recorded some tracks, and then he said, yeah, we'll go for it, we'll record an album. So that was how My Time, those tracks that I'd done for Cheltenham got recorded, which was great, So the next track that I'd like to play is something that I used to play with my quintet when we weren't playing my own compositions. I used to sort of cover a few other people's songs that I particularly admired, and this one is from Kenny Garrett, and it's called Song for Defang from the album Happy People. It was one of the first sort of cover versions that I ever arranged actually for the quintet, and I've got very fond memories of performing these at the jazz festivals that we were doing. Kenny Garrett, for me, I love his playing, and as well as Kenny Garrett, this has got Marcus Miller on bass, and I love Marcus Miller as well. But what I like about Kenny is that he really, on this track in particular, he uses little more than a pentatonic scale. Again, he has a sort of a melodic simplicity if you were to analyse it, and get into a sort of whole sort of very technical analyse what notes he's playing over what chords. It's actually very, very simplistic, but with the restriction of pretty much one scale in one key, he says so much. He does so much with that one scale, and I'm a big believer in less is more in the music that I listen to, and also in communicating through music, because jazz can be a very introverted thing, and that's not what I'm into at all. I'm really about communicating, and Kenny Garrett really, really does that. I mean, his tracks, you can hear him, he's screaming, he's crying, he's shouting, he's pleading, he's whispering, he really has a lot to say, and I really sort of feel that.
Let's give it a listen then. Song for Defang by Kenny Garrett. So on with the story.
Well, I thought it would be nice to play another track from my time, from my album. The only things I've played so far have been on alto, but actually I play all 4 saxophones, and I play all 4 regularly, so I don't particularly consider myself to be more of an alto player than anything else. I started on tenor when I was 12. I started on tenor when I was 12. I sort of begged my parents for a saxophone, and I had a friend in the county music service who managed to find a really kind of clapped out old saxophone in the cupboard that nobody was using, which is probably because it didn't work very well. I had to blow really, really hard to get the bottom notes to come out because they leaked, and then I used to get told off in the swing band for playing too loudly. It was the only way I could make it work. So I started on tenor, and it was very soon, I guess. I hadn't been playing for too long when my parents got me one that worked, a nice new shiny one. But when I went to the conservatoire, I got an alto. We were encouraged to sort of play more than one saxophone, and actually in my first year there as well, they got me playing baritone in the saxophone workshops there. And as soon as I started to play the baritone, they said, "Oh yes, you've got to do this, you've got to do more of this." And I could only play like one note before I expired. It takes so much puff. But I ended up actually my first year buying a baritone as well, because I joined a saxophone 6-piece group where we wrote our own music, and we used to go on these little busking tours, and it was fantastic. I play soprano, alto, tenor and baritone, so I thought it'd be nice to play something on soprano, and the next track is called By 12. The other reason I chose this is because it's a nice contrast to the first track that you heard, and it's a track that we originally recorded in the demo session that we did at Red Kite Studios. When we went back to record the album for real, as it were, we decided when we listened back to this demo version that we weren't going to re-record it because we really like the feel of it, and it has this really nice build. So this is By 12 from my time.
guest this evening, Anna Brooks, showing her versatility there, playing soprano saxophone on her own composition by 12. So Anna, next on your playlist is Michael Brecker.
Yes, this is a track from his album, The Nearness of You, the Ballads album, called Don't Let Me Be Lonely Tonight. This album came out around the time I was writing music for my jazz quintet. I love Michael Brecker's ballads. Something about Michael Brecker, you know, he can really do this sort of full-on testosterone. You know, you listen to the stuff in the 70s, some skunk funk, and you know those tracks and the Brecker Brothers tracks. What I love, again, I guess it's the same as I said about Charlie Parker. I love the ballads. I love Michael Brecker's ballads because he can capture the feel of a ballad perfectly, and he can do something which is quite rare, in my opinion, which is to be able to play a solo in a pop song, which still sounds very jazz, but not out of context. And you know, he's obviously performed on with pop artists on a number of albums. I think it's one of my pet hates hearing a musician playing sort of bebop over a pop track. Drives me crazy. And it actually, you know, it's a bit of a misconception that jazz is this very complex thing and that pop is, you know, something very simple. It takes a lot of skill to play a pop solo if you've had a jazz upbringing, and not to play, you know, every diminished lick and altered scale and goodness knows what else you know, and instead to play something in a less harmonically complex context, which is not too jazz but not too sort of trite sounding or simplistic. And Brecker, for me, really nails that. He really hits that spot right in the middle. On this track, James Taylor is doing the vocal, and I think for a lot of musicians, certainly a lot of musicians that I've known, James Taylor is a bit like Marmite because, you know, you either hate him or you love him. And I know some musicians who say, oh, it's like nails on a blackboard, and you know, other people who really appreciate it. Whichever way you feel about James Taylor, he's got a very distinctive voice, and it's not a great singer's voice. To me, it's the voice of a musician who sings, which is something I identify with, because I do a fair bit of backing vocals, and you know, I do some singing in various forms, sort of professionally, but I would never call myself a singer as such. But James Taylor's strength, I think, lies in the sincerity of his delivery. So this is Don't Let Me Be Lonely Tonight.
Michael Brecker on tenor saxophone there, and James Taylor, and Don't Let Me Be Lonely Tonight. On with your story.
Well, skip a few years, raising children and generally keeping busy and working as a musician. I guess between this time and the time at which I recorded my next track, I spent 2 years working as a musical director for the Drifters. I got involved in arranging work. I arrange theatre shows and anything from small kind of band things right up to the whole theatre shows. I got involved with music preparation, which I guess technically speaking the term is music copyist, but a lot of people don't really know what that means. It can be anything from transcribing music for somebody, arranging music, to making things lay out properly on the page, which is actually something I used to do for Doctor Who actually, and Torchwood. I used to make all of the music look nice. I didn't compose it, I didn't arrange it, I made it look nice on the page. And I still do that for people, as well as things like checking for mistakes. Heaven forbid that any of the composers or arrangers would make a mistake. But I'm working on that sort of stuff constantly, as well as performing these days, which is great. It's the sort of work I can do in my own time. And also during this time I became musical director for the Dictionary of Soul, and again I'll play a track by the Dictionary of Soul a little later. But in 2007 I had the opportunity to record and produce an EP of pretty much whatever I wanted. So I wrote a couple of tracks and also arranged a cover of a third track for that EP. And this track, which is called Going My Way, from the EP of the same name, it's my favourite track from that. I'm on saxes and vocals. And what I love about this is I really love having the freedom to be able to play, to record and produce something that isn't just what you can play live, which was what I did with my first jazz album. It had to be able to be performed live, no overdubs or anything like that. Also, as I mentioned before, I'm a bit of a frustrated singer, and I do a lot of backing vocals in bands and projects that I'm involved with. So my vocals on this track, and some of the other tracks on the EP as well.
Let's have a listen then. It's called Going My Way. away from my guest this evening, Anna Brooks. So Anna, next on your CV is the Brooklyn Funk Essentials.
Yes, I joined the Brooklyn Funk Essentials last year. They're a band who were formed back in the 90s in Brooklyn, New York, and they asked me if I would tour with them, and I said yes, I'd love to. I love their music. It's a really eclectic mix of funk and ska, reggae, hip-hop, R&B, and even Turkish music. So I'm not on this track, but this is one of the tracks that I particularly enjoy playing with the band, and it's called Brooklyn Recycles.
I think time's beating us on this one. It's a shame to fade it. Brooklyn Funk Essentials and Brooklyn Recycles. So, bringing your story right up to date.
Yes, this is a track with Roy G. Hemmings, who I've worked with for 15 years. Roy was a member of the Drifters, and we have a Motown show and also a Philadelphia Soul show at the moment. But on Sunday I'm at the Town Hall with Roy's Reach Out to Motown show, and this is the other side of me, a little more Motown, and this is Roy and I performing How Sweet It Is.
Thank you, baby. Hey now, how sweet it is to be loved.
Fading time again, I'm afraid. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you.
It's Birmingham Town Hall.
Birmingham Town Hall on Sunday the 19th of February.
Put that date in your diary. Thanks for being our guest this evening.
Thank you for having me.
It's been great fun. I hope you've enjoyed it.
I have. Thank you.
Perhaps we'll entice you back again sometime.
I'd love to come back.
That'd be great. It's Jazz Kaleidoscope on 102.5 The Bridge.